We were the U.S. Army, the most trained, most equipped force in history. And we believed this war would bend to us. It didn't. When we first arrived, everything felt controlled. Briefings were clean. Maps were sharp. Plans made sense. We were told, this is a broken enemy. They can't fight us head on. We just need time. Our gear was heavy, modern, perfect. Radios worked. Air support was always one call away. Back then, we still believed war followed rules. But Afghanistan didn't play by them. The enemy didn't defend cities, didn't protect borders, didn't care if we took land. They cared about waiting. Patrols felt easy at first. Too easy. Villages were quiet. Roads were empty. People smiled, but their eyes didn't. You start noticing small things. A shop that closes when you arrive. A street that's empty every afternoon. A man who watches but never speaks. Intel reports didn't match reality. Maps didn't show fear. Briefings didn't explain silence. That's when doubt crept in. We weren't fighting an army. We were standing inside someone else's patience. One day, a road we had walked a dozen times before suddenly exploded. No warning. No enemy in sight. Just fire, dust, screaming metal. The blast didn't just hit the ground. It hit our thinking. That road wasn't dangerous yesterday, but it was today, and that meant something terrifying. Nothing here stayed the same for long. Our strength, speed, power, force meant less when the enemy chose when to fight. We could win battles. We could clear areas. But the war didn't feel like it was moving forward. It felt like it was learning us. Slowly, the army began to understand. Big bases made us predictable. Heavy convoys made us targets. Power without trust created distance. This war wasn't about taking ground. It was about understanding people. And we weren't ready for that. Not yet. Afghanistan wasn't trying to destroy the U.S. Army. It was doing something worse. It was changing how we thought about war. We came believing strength would end this fast. But Afghanistan had more time than we did. And soon, the army would be forced to change. Not because it wanted to, but because it had to. After that first explosion, nothing felt normal again. Same mountains, same roads, same villages. But now, everything looked suspicious. We stopped walking confidently. We started walking carefully. Every step had weight. Every sound mattered. The ground wasn't just dirt anymore. It was a question. Is it safe? Or is it waiting? That's when we truly met the enemy Afghanistan was famous for. Not men with rifles. IEDs. IEDs didn't fight fair. They didn't miss. They didn't care how trained you were. A pressure plate under dust. A wire hidden in trash. A bomb built from scraps, strong enough to flip armored trucks. You could do everything right and still lose a friend. Convoys slowed down. Patrols became tense and silent. No music. No talking. Eyes down. Weapons ready. Hearts pounding. The youngest soldiers learned the hardest lesson first. You don't need to see the enemy to be killed by him. Commanders noticed something fast. Big units drew attention. Heavy movement invited attacks. So the army began breaking itself into smaller pieces. Outposts replaced big bases. Squads replaced convoys. Relationships replaced distance. We started living closer to villages. Sharing tea. Listening more than talking. A handshake mattered. A rumor mattered. A wrong word could undo months of work. This was new territory for us. We were trained to close with and destroy the enemy. Now we were told to understand him. And that wasn't written in any manual. The enemy watched us constantly. They learned our routines. They learned our routes. They learned our timing. So we had to break habits. Random patrol times. Different paths. No patterns. Drones became our eyes in the sky. Intel became more important than firepower. And leadership shifted. Decisions that once came from far away now rested in the hands of young sergeants on dusty roads. One choice could save lives. One mistake could haunt you forever. Change came fast, but not fast enough. Med-evac helicopters became familiar sounds. Stretchers passed quietly at night. No speeches, no cameras, just boots walking slower than before. You didn't ask questions. You just packed your gear and went out again. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking hurt. Afghanistan was shaping us under pressure. Not gently, but violently. By now, the U.S. Army had adapted. Smaller, smarter, more careful. But adaptation doesn't mean victory. Because while we were changing how we fought, the war was changing what victory even meant. And soon, we would face the hardest truth of all. Winning battles does not mean winning wars. By the time we reached the later years of the war, we were no longer the same soldiers who first arrived. Not even close. The uniforms looked the same. The flags were the same. The patches were the same. But inside, everything had shifted. This war didn't just teach us how to fight. It taught us how fragile control really is. There was no briefing for what happened slowly. No slide explaining how. Silence follows you home. Crowds feel loud. Calm feels suspicious. You didn't notice it at first. You just stopped standing with your back to doors. You sat where you could see everyone. You memorized exits without thinking. War habits became life habits. Afghanistan trained our minds to stay alert, even when the war wasn't around anymore. The enemy had one advantage we never could take away: time. They didn't rotate home after 12 months. They didn't worry about headlines. They didn't answer to voters. They waited. If we cleared an area, they left. If we left, they returned. And slowly, the army began to understand a painful truth. You can't rush stability. You can't schedule trust. You can't force belief. This wasn't a war with an end date. It was a war of endurance. We learned how to clear villages perfectly. Perfect movement. Perfect coordination. Perfect discipline. But the real question came after. What happens tomorrow? Security without trust faded fast. Fear never turned into loyalty. We could protect a village during the day and lose it emotionally by night. The army began focusing on something new. Local forces, local leadership, local responsibility. But building an army inside a war zone is never clean. Some stood strong. Some broke. Some played both sides just to survive. And survival always comes before loyalty. Back home, manuals changed. Training changed. Language changed. Words like counterinsurgency, population-centric warfare, intelligence fusion. These weren't theories anymore. They were written in blood, dust, and mistakes. Young officers who learned leadership in Afghanistan became the future commanders of the army. They didn't believe in perfect plans anymore. They believed in adaptability. This war changed who mattered most. Not generals in distant rooms, but corporals at checkpoints, sergeants leading patrols, lieutenants making calls without time to ask permission. Trust moved downward. Responsibility followed. And that weight stayed with them long after the mission ended. Not every loss was dramatic. Some were quiet. A soldier who stopped laughing. A medic who avoided eye contact. A unit that came home thinner, emotionally. No parades. No speeches. Just families learning how to live with someone who came back different. Afghanistan didn't only take lives. It took pieces of people. Afghanistan forced the U.S. Army to face reality. Future wars won't look clean. Enemies won't stand in lines. Technology won't replace understanding. Drones help. Satellites help. Weapons help. But none of them replace human judgment. That lesson reshaped everything that followed. When withdrawal came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closing a book without the last chapter. Some felt relief. Some felt anger. Some felt empty. Years of sacrifice didn't disappear, but the ending felt unfinished. And that might be the most honest ending war can give. The U.S. Army that exists today is not the army that entered Afghanistan. It is more cautious, more decentralized, more aware of limits. This war didn't make the army weaker. It made it wiser. At a terrible cost. Afghanistan didn't end when the planes left. It lives on in training fields, in doctrine, in the way orders are given, and in the quiet moments. When veterans remember dust, mountains, and silence. This wasn't a war that ended the U.S. Army. It was the war that changed it forever. There was a moment near the end of my deployment when I realized the war had already changed me. Not during a firefight, not during an explosion, but during a quiet patrol. We were walking through a village we had secured many times before. Kids waved. Dogs barked. Life looked normal. And yet, my body stayed tense. That's when it hit me. The war had taught us to never fully relax. Afghanistan trained the nervous system. Your ears learned to separate normal sounds from wrong ones. Your eyes learned to scan hands, not faces. Your brain learned to assume danger before peace. Even sleep wasn't real sleep. You rested, but you never shut down. And the army started realizing something important. A force that stays alert for years doesn't come home unchanged. Units rotated in and out. Fresh soldiers arrived full of energy. Veterans left with heavy eyes and short sentences. Knowledge passed down quickly. Don't trust patterns. Never take the same road twice. Silence is not safety. The war became a cycle. But the enemy stayed. They didn't rotate. They didn't reset. They just waited for the next unit to make the same mistakes. And slowly, the army understood. Experience mattered more than rank. By the later years, bullets were no longer the first solution. Information was. Who talks to whom? Who stopped showing up? Who suddenly had money? The war became about connections. And that changed training forever. Soldiers were now expected to think like analysts, to read behavior, to sense tension. This wasn't what the army had been built for originally, but Afghanistan demanded it. Some decisions had no clean answer. Protect a village leader who might be corrupt, or risk chaos without him. Strike a target, or risk civilian harm. Do nothing, or let the enemy grow stronger. These weren't textbook problems. They were human problems. And the weight of those choices followed soldiers home. When deployments ended, home didn't feel like relief. It felt unfamiliar. Noise felt sharp. Crowds felt dangerous. Stillness felt wrong. The army noticed this too. Mental health conversations became unavoidable. Not because weakness increased, but because exposure lasted too long. Afghanistan made endurance part of the mission. The army learned patience. Politics did not. Timelines shifted. Strategies changed names. Goals adjusted. But the soldier on the ground still walked the same roads. That gap between strategy and reality became one of the war's biggest lessons. Future planning would never ignore ground truth again. At least, not easily. Today's U.S. Army carries Afghanistan quietly, in how it trains leaders early, in how it values decentralized command, in how it treats intelligence as survival. The war forced the army to admit, power has limits. Force has consequences. Understanding matters. This wasn't weakness. It was maturity. Afghanistan didn't give us a clear ending. No parade. No final victory image. Just lessons. Hard ones. Permanent ones. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not triumph. Not failure. But transformation. Years later, when people ask what Afghanistan did to the U.S. Army, I don't talk about battles. I don't talk about weapons. I talk about how we think now. Because that's what the war really changed. Forever.